By part, I stand in firm negation of the resolution. Resolved, birthright citizenship should be abolished in the United States. To clarify, we observe that the Constitution and its amendments are symbols of governmental strength, and thus were not meant to be frequently amended or redefined. Affirming today's debate then must be weighed against the loss of legitimacy and constancy for the U.S. government. If we as a con give you doubt first that the problem warrants abolition, or second, that abolition is the most preferable option, then we find a reason to negate. Contention 1. Abolishing birthright citizenship opposes common ethics of U.S. policy. According to the GAO, all 12 of Congress's current proposals are aimed at lessening the presence of illegal immigrants. The Harvard Law Review notes, though, that such policies are use unborn children as a means to an end. According to Harvard, any reasonable concept of equality does not permit the government to single out undocumented children as a way of expressing opposition to illegal immigration for which the children are not responsible. As the Supreme Court finds in Webner v. Aetna, though attributing punishment without crimes runs counter to every principle of American justice. According to the court, since no child is responsible for birth, manipulation of children fundamentally alters the principle that legal burdens should bear some relationship to individual wrongdoing. Abolishing birthright citizenship, then, counters U.S. legal culture and sets flawed precedents on individual guilt. Contention 2. Abolishing birthright citizenship creates a disenfranchised subclass within the United States. It is crucial to note that affirming today's debate does not guarantee an end to illegal immigration. In fact, according to USA Today, the U.S. only deported 3.6% of its illegal population in 2009. According to Garrett Epps of the Center for American Progress in May 2011, then abolition would create a large internal population of native-born non-citizens, a hereditary subordinate caste of persons who are subjected to American law but do not belong within American society. The implications are negative in two ways. First, abolition disenfranchises minorities. According to the Immigration Policy Center, 8.6% of all registered voters are U.S.-born children of immigrants. Voters whose voice would be silenced by abolition. Societally, the Carnegie Corporation of New York explains that these voters are over 90% minority, removing diverse opinions likely to play a pivotal role in national, state, local elections in the years to come. Individually, according to the Fordham Law Review in January 2007, such a policy removes the individual's foundational protection from state authority. Second, abolition lowers assimilation. As Susie Kim of Foreign Policy writes, successful integration has always been a multi-generational process. Kids learn English, have better educational outcomes, and earn more all in the course of a single generation. Ron Haskins of the Brookings Institution quantifies that because assimilation is so effective, second-generation immigrants not only exceed the wages of first-generation immigrants by more than 30%, they also exceed the wages of non-immigrant workers by 6.3%. In contrast, according to Sam Fullwood of the Center for American Progress, a system without birthright citizenship would severely hamper the ability of parents and their children to assimilate or aspire for upward mobility. Contention 3. Abolishing birthright citizenship comes with staggering bureaucratic implications. The aforementioned Fullwood writes, any new system would feature processes requiring parents to produce documents establishing citizenship at the moment of the child's birth. Fullwood concludes that abolition would substitute straightforward citizenship with a burdensome process. Over 11,000 births per day would encounter vast bureaucratic red tape. Essentially, a pro vote replaces a definitive system with a discretionary one. According to Alan Brownfield of the Foundation for Economic Education, the accountability crisis is that we cannot realistically hope for administrative abuses to be checked by any watchdog system, giving executives too much room for bias in determining citizenship. The Washington Examiner goes on to explain that, given the politicalization of a large bureaucracy, workplace enforcement can fluctuate as much as 70% between political administrations. On top of the instability and bias, John Miller of the Cato Institute estimates that a systemic error rate of just 1% would wrongly deny jobs to 650,000 American workers each year because of bureaucratic mistakes. Thus we negate.
Yeah, we'll run a little bit further.
Okay.
And let's begin. We affirm resolve. Birthright citizenship should be abolished in the United States. Contention 1. Birthright citizenship has destructive legal consequences. Subpoint A. Negative incentives. As Christine Tsai of Georgetown University explains, the status quo creates a perverse incentive for illegal immigration, whereby the reward for illegally entering the country can be an American child. Thus, the result of birthright citizenship is decreased respect for the rule of law. As federal judge Richard Posner notes, the situation we have today is absurd. For example, there's a huge and growing industry that arranges tourist visas for pregnant women so they can fly into the United States and give birth to an American child. John Fear of the Center for Immigration Studies continues, noting that doctors, hotel owners, and immigrant families in the U.S. have assembled what amounts to a birth tourism assembly line, reportedly arranging the U.S. birth of over 12,000 children from Turkey alone since just 2003. Natalie Smith of Georgetown concludes, writing that we send a poor signal as a society to the newest Americans when we reward those that break the rules by granting citizenship to their children. while at the same time we deny the same privileges to the children of those who wait to immigrate legally. Subpoint B, women's rights. The Michigan Law Review observes that the birthplace rule effectively forces immigration to implement its decisions about membership up front by controlling the flow of aliens into its country. In the U.S., for example, immigration control has evolved into an issue of women's rights. Allison Hartree of UC Berkeley writes that birthright citizenship is, in fact, a debate over women of color and their right to control their reproduction. The abuse of women is highlighted by examples of U.S. agents deporting pregnant women to avoid granting citizenship. Hartree continues, finding that the only option that allows immigration and customs enforcement to meet its multiple objectives is to remove pregnant women before they give birth, denying the women control over their reproductive capacity. They want to keep pregnant women detained until they're removed, and they want to remove them as quickly as possible. Abolishing birthright citizenship is the only way for marginalized women to escape both the figurative and literal shackles of detainment and deportation. Contention 2. Birthright citizenship harms legal immigration. Birthright citizenship creates a legal loophole in which individuals can circumvent the proper channels of immigration. Peter Shoup of Yale University writes that admission to the American political community is, and under any imaginable circumstances, will remain a zero-sum game, a situation in which aliens must compete against one another for the very limited number of available admission slots. As Natalie Smith of Georgetown Immigration Law Journal explains, by allowing the citizenship loophole to be exploited and permitting illegal alien parents to eventually obtain citizenship, the amount of legal immigrants subsequently becomes lower. This impacts in two ways. First, allowing immigrants to circumvent the proper channels of immigration, we essentially condone inequality. In essence, we allow people to cut in line, instantly gaining U.S. citizenship, while making those who wait years to gain access legally wait even longer to immigrate. Second, we deny educated workers access to U.S. citizenship, costing the U.S. potential long-term job growth. According to the Brookings Institute, for every 100 foreign-born legal immigrants who had advanced degrees from U.S. universities, it's associated with a job growth of 262 jobs for native-born workers. Contention 3. Birthright citizenship harms national security. By creating a serious legal loophole, birthright citizenship has allowed dangerous individuals heightened access to the U.S. According to the Hoover Institute, birthright citizenship clearly facilitates terrorism. Plotters can easily travel to and from terrorist training camps on American passports. They can't be monitored as easily as traditional immigrants. They can't be deported and have certain legal rights that foreigners lack. In these senses, birthright citizenship greases the wheels of domestic terrorism. A Georgetown University report explains that having a child can be used to circumvent screening procedures. Birthright citizenship allows foreigners who would normally be ineligible to receive their visas to become permanent residents. According to the U.S. Center for Immigration, by way of example, Anwar al-Awlaki, one of the masterminds behind the Times Square bombing, Fort Hood attack, and the Christmas Day bombing, is a product of our current lax birthright citizenship standards, that even though he's clearly antagonistic to the United States. Indeed, a study by James Keppard of the Center for Immigration Studies cited that 2/3 of all foreign-born terrorists who operated in the United States committed immigration fraud prior to or in conjunction with taking part in terrorist activity. The Center for Immigration Studies concludes, noting that birthright citizenship benefited 6 of the September 11th hijackers. For all of the aforementioned reasons, vote affirmative.
Alright, so it usually takes 9 months, correct, to have a child?
Well, yes.
Alright, so how come 96% of children born in the United States to illegal mothers happened in the 2 or plus years that these women have been in the United States?
Just because the women came here earlier doesn't mean they had the intention of having a child.
No, but well, first of all, their intention is economic opportunity. But if you're saying these pregnant women are crossing the border to come to the United States to have their children, then how come they're waiting more than 2 years?
Don't monopolize crossfire. The issue is, even if they want economic benefits, our case indicates in order to get a legal job, they still need to become a citizen. So even if their incentive is economics, they need to become a citizenship first. So prerequisite to economics is citizenship, so that's the #1 incentive. Do you know that?
Not at all. Actually, they come on temporary work visas, or they come here illegally and just work under the table.
Okay, there's a difference between temporary work visas and the topic of discussion. Do you have another question?
No, do you have a question?
Okay, let's talk about your first contention. How are we really blaming the child? Like, isn't it your burden to show a harm?
Well, we're essentially showing, would you agree that the child has absolutely no choice as to where they're born?
I hope not.
All right. And do you not think that it's a principle of the American justice system that the punishment, 1, fit the crime, and that 2, we do not put the punishment on the
My question is, like, do you win this
argument? Is it better to not let a guilty person run free than to put an innocent person in jail?
How can you win the argument?
What we're essentially showing you is that you're using the child, 1, as a means to an end, and you're punishing the child from
means
getting
to an end. You still need to prove that there's harm to the child, correct?
Yes, there is, because you're essentially saying, all right, you're going to be deported, and you're going to be going to an impoverished country. If you agree that economic opportunity is the reason these parents come here, they're obviously coming here for a greater standard of living. And you're denying that citizen of the United States a greater standard of living.
So you can see that you need to show harm.
No, I'm saying that we have shown harm. What we're showing you is
Okay,
that you're looking at
do you agree that you need to show
and you're
that
setting
harm?
a precedent against the
You're not
entire
answering my
legal
question.
system of the United States.
Do you agree that you need to show that harm?
I would say that I have shown the harm, that our case shows
Okay,
the
but
harm.
would you have to in a vacuum?
Yes, we have to show
Okay,
the harm.
do you have a question for me?
Yes, okay, so you say that illegal immigration is harming legal immigration, but wouldn't you agree that considering we have a 12 to 20-year wait in visa lines, that really it's legal immigration that's causing the wait in legal immigration that's causing illegal immigration?
Here's the thing, the legal channels would be cleared up if we didn't have so many people filling our quotas. In other words, the United States has to accommodate so many people.
So are you saying that the illegal, undocumented workers are filling the documented worker quota?
Here is our argument. Do you want to hear it?
I would love to.
Okay, the argument is that these illegal immigrants come here and have a child. And what this does is it takes up a citizenship slot. And if the United States didn't give so many people citizenship through this process, then more people could come through the legal channels, which Kyle and I believe is a more fair way to advocate to them.
Alright, that doesn't make sense. But first of all,
if the United States didn't have
so
to
what you're
accommodate
essentially
so
saying
many
is that a
people
citizen of the United States is taking up a quota for immigrants from other countries.
Like, would you agree that the United States obviously can't let everybody be a U.S. citizen?
Yes, I would.
So they need to, in some way, regulate who can be one.
Yes, and
So
we
if
do,
somebody
and we do that
comes here,
and we do that, you're right,
somebody
immigration
comes-
quotas.
Can I
But
answer?
how does illegal
If
immigration
somebody comes here without U.S. jurisdiction, that means that we don't have more control over our system, which means we can't allow the legal channels to open, so people need to wait 20 years, like you said, to become a legal immigrant when people can just cut it
No,
out.
actually, what you see.
Alright, can I just run that? Alright. So let's start off with remembering the way you're framing today's debate. The pro team cannot just identify problems in the status quo. They have to show you, first of all, that these problems warrant abolition, and second of all, that this abolition actually has promise of working, and that's really key when we're evaluating their case. So let's go right into it with their contention one. And first of all, they talk about this negative incentive, and they talk about how supposedly this birth tourism industry is cropping up and swamping our system right now, and so removing birthright citizenship would decrease this industry and make the system better. But I have a couple of responses. So first of all, what they don't really give you is the scope. They tell you 12,000 people from Turkey alone, but when you take that out of the whole picture, it's really insignificant. According to the CIS, less than 0.2% of all births in the United States are even maybe attributable to this supposed birth tourism industry. So at best, my opponents are asking you to affirm off of less than 0.2%, which goes against our framework. Second, look at the fact that according to the Pew Center, this birth tourism industry doesn't really make any sense. If it were true, we would have more women and men, which we don't. The immigration trends wouldn't neatly parallel economic trends over the past couple decades, which they don't. And the women would leave soon after having their child and enter the country shortly before having their child, which they don't. Because as my partner brought up in Crossfire, most of these births are to women that have been in the country for 2 or more years. So the logic behind my opponent's point here really doesn't make any sense. And so then to really exhibit that, if by this logic, if this were true and citizenship was the draw, we would have the same problem from Canada as we do from Mexico, but we don't. The problem is economics, and so illegal immigration trends from the two nations prove that the draw is economics, not citizenship. So then fourth, even if they're winning this contention and getting an actual decrease in illegal immigration, remember that they're telling you we're using the children as a means to an end. They tell you we're violating the rule of law. The children did not violate the rule of law, and yet my opponents are asking you to take away their fundamental rights because of their parents' actions. So even if they win this subpoint A, that's a huge ethical loss. So let's talk about their subpoint B about women's rights. And first of all, they give you no statistical warrants for the scope of this problem. So again, it doesn't meet our framework for an actual needed change to the status quo. And second of all, what you're going to always be prioritizing is the rule of law. Like until they show you that it's worse to deport these women who entered our country illegally and uphold our rule of law than to just let them stay here, then they don't get any of their impacts. So you're always going to prefer the rule of law to letting our laws just go to waste. So then let's talk about their second contention where they talk about legal rights, and they basically talk about how illegal immigration cuts in line, and so that's a really big problem for our immigration system. But first, as my partner brought up in Crossfire, the cause of the waits is not illegal immigration. The Congressional Research Service identifies the problem as our quotas and our bureaucratic system. So when you look at our case and we're telling you the bureaucracy will get harder, not easier, that's no reason to affirm. And then the implicit in my opponent's contention is this idea of chain migration, and that these child citizens make their parents legal. You have to be 21 to access these benefits, and most of family-sponsored immigration is by legal immigrants, so they don't even get the logic behind their contention. And then they talk about condoning inequality, but they don't really solve it either, because illegal immigration does not end in their world any more than it ends in ours. And so then with their second point, they talk about decreasing educated workers. Quotas will remain in both worlds, and when bureaucracy makes it worse, that's a point where you're negating because you want our quota system to actually be functional. So let's talk about their third contention where they talk about national security. And first of all, I'd like to point out that this entire contention is pretty isolated and based on examples. They tell you basically Anwar al-Awlaki did it, other people must be too. It sounds a little bit like a conspiracy theory and not very systemic. And so then when you're looking at the systemic, the ICE out and out says our biggest terror problem is our borders. And when you abolish birthright citizenship, you make the ICE's job harder because they'll be more and more overloaded. So if you want actual protection from terrorism, you're going to be negating. And the logic, again, behind my opponent's contention fails because these terrorists are more easy to track with a U.S. passport than when they're undocumented.
Start off with their first observation where they basically talk about the Constitution and the constitutional legitimacy. And whenever you're evaluating this argument, there are three things you need to look to. The first comes from Ashley Mendoza of the Journal of Law and Family Studies, who tells us that the intent of the 14th Amendment was never to establish birthright citizenship. The current interpretation runs afoul of it because the 14th Amendment, specifically Senator Howard, who was one of the key members who introduced the 14th Amendment itself, stated that it was never intended to apply to them. Second, you're going to look to Garrett Epps of the University of Baltimore, who tells us that birthright citizenship doesn't make sense in a modern context. The Constitution is a living document, and it needs to change with changing times. Because of that, that's how you're going to be evaluating an argument. But third, you're going to look to Natalie Smith of the Georgetown Immigration Law Journal, and this is really important. She tells us that birthright citizenship subverts respect for rule of law. This is the argument we make in our first contention. By incentivizing individuals to break our laws, we are contravening the legitimacy of the Constitution, and you're going to use that argument against them. Move on to their first contention, which basically talks about ethics. And they're talking about harming kids. But what you really need to see is that harming kids isn't happening. Number one, the Harvard Journal of Law and Public Policy explains that the current system is not that birthright citizen, or that the abolishment would not be unfair because government has a superior obligation to its own citizens. The government needs to protect our best interests, so you're going to look to that first and foremost in today's round. But second, the Northern Kentucky Law Review explains that the unfairness argument can be used against them because it's actually unfair to the legal immigrants who are waiting as a result of birthright citizenship. Specifically, the Harvard Journal of Law and Public Policy tells us the moral claim of children abroad is actually greater because their conditions are worse. People who are residents here, even if they're not full citizens, still have the basic benefits of the U.S. medical infrastructure, for example. Those waiting to immigrate through legal channels are not able to with a system of birthright citizenship, so you can turn their argument against them there. Then you can go on specifically to the bottom part where they're basically talking about like all the harms to the individual. But what you need to look to is Peter from Yale University, who explains that fairness does not have to mean citizenship. Specifically, Christine Tsai of Georgetown University tells us that we can still offer residency to those living in our country. We don't need to provide them with full citizenship in today's debate. So it's not a reason to be voting for them. So long as we're not throwing people out of our country, so long as we're still giving them mechanism to be able to have a prosperous life here, we're not denying them of any rights, so their punishment argument can be used against them. Go on to their second contention, where they're basically talking about the subclass that's going to be created. I tell you first and foremost that Christoph Sadjones of Pompey University explains that there's a fundamental flaw with their argument, which is that once birthright citizenship is abolished, these people will not remain in the United States. A large portion of them will choose to return to their own country, so the underclass that they're talking about won't be formed. But second, look to Christopher Eitzberg of New York University, who explains that we also create the same stratifying effect in other countries by not permitting their children to come. Essentially, there's always going to be the stratification they talk about occurring because those who are legally waiting to immigrate are going to be unable to under their system. But third, look to the Harvard Journal of Law and Public Policy, which explains that the immigration status of adults remains unchanged. The problems will not get any worse if you were to abolish birthright citizenship. The problems they're talking about are happening right now. Finally, you can use their argument against them, because the Michigan Law Review explains that birthright citizenship actually forces proactive border fortification and increases hostility. The reason we're building a wall is because as soon as a citizen gets onto U.S. soil, they're there and they can no longer be removed. That's why ICE is abusing pregnant women for no other reason than that they can't allow them to stay in the country. That's why we're creating an incentive towards basically violence, and that's going to turn the argument against them. Then go on to the argument specifically where they're talking about minority voting. One, remember that minorities are still represented legally, but two, Harvard explains that we're reducing our right of self-determination. We need to be able to prioritize the benefits of our citizens in today's round. That's the framework you should be evaluating. Go on to their third contention, which basically talks about bureaucracy. First, Christine Tsai of Georgetown University explains no other country suffered from the bureaucracies we're talking about. So if worse came to worse, the difficulties would only be short-term. But second, she tells us that the government already has mechanisms in place to solve. Finally, you're going to look to Mark Krikorian of the National Review, who tells us that reform is possible after birthright citizenship, which will eliminate all their harms. So for all of these reasons, I can see nothing but a pro ballot in today's debate. Thank you.
So can you tell me what percentage of family-sponsored immigration is of illegal immigrants by their children?
I'm sorry, I don't get your question.
Like, to get any access to your legal, like, we're cutting in line argument, you have to tell me that these illegal parents are actually getting legal citizenship. Because right now, by definition, by being illegal immigrants, they're not cutting a line, they're not even a part of the line. So it's not like bureaucratic strains are not a product of illegal immigration.
You can see it yourself in the rebuttal when you said you must be 21 to sponsor. We are showing sponsorship happen, but actually, actually the Harvard Journal of Law and Public Policy tells us that they can get the track code citizenship in as early as 7 years through certain bureaucratic movements.
But until you you can name all the processes you want, but what you need to access your impacts are because by any logic you're telling me that illegal immigration circumvents legal immigration, which makes legal impossible. But they're by definition parallel processes which don't interact.
I think this is the question you're asking, which is how do we show that we reduce illegal immigration? Is that correct?
How do you access your bureaucracy solves all problems and impacts?
We don't make that argument. Okay, I think there's two pieces of evidence that sort of like the answer to your question. The first comes from the Northern Kentucky Law Review, which explains that for illegal immigrants who came here, 65% stated birthright citizenship is a key motivator. The second comes from the...
are you just going to extend through all my responses to your first contingent subpoint A?
Okay, let's talk specifically about your responses. Okay. Our subpoint A...
I'll talk about them. So first of all, why should we amend the Constitution based off 0.2% of all
We don't need to amend the Constitution.
Well, I said, if you look at my framework,
Peter Schuck of Yale University specifically explains that we could change it without an amendment.
Amend or redefine. Basically our framework isn't nearly as abusive as you tell me. Basically all we're saying is since it changes a constitutional principle, you have to tell me that we should do it in the status quo, and that it will work. Tell me how that's abusive.
What do you mean constitutional principle? Specifically, the Mendoza analysis I read tells you that it was never even the intent of the 14th Amendment. But more importantly, I think
Senator Mallory's intent is vastly misconstrued if you really want to go into that.
We should look at some of the practical impacts of this in today's round.
Yeah.
Okay. Then you should be
like a 70% plus by a massive.
Then let's look at the Smith analysis at the bottom. We're telling you birthright citizenship subverts respect for a rule of law because it creates an incentive for individuals to violate it. For example.
First of all, I told you you don't get solvency, and second, even if you win that entire point, you're violating the ethical principles.
Let's talk about this one at a time. The second piece of evidence I was going to say is the Harvard Journal of Law and Public Policy explains that abolishing birthright citizenship would have a minimum reduction of 10% in the overall rate of immigration.
By what methodology? Unless you're telling me they come here to have a child and go back home, which all of the logic and all of the evidence goes against, then you don't get any solvency.
Do you ever directly answer the argument that we are incentivizing illegal immigration? That's our subpoint A.
So you're again telling me people come here to have children and ignoring all my responses.
No, we're answering your responses.
You're answering by extending what I refuted. That's not answering, that's just ignoring.
No, my partner will hand it.
Economics goes against it and all logic.
To begin, we're going to look at the ethics argument of the proposing frame. What we're going to actually find is that we're saying the child is not responsible for their birth, naturally. And so what we're showing you is that birthright citizenship, one, upholds the ethics of the United States legal system, as well as the fact that it's the most equal system that the United States can implement because it disregards all circumstances except birth. It doesn't look at class, it doesn't look at wealth, it doesn't look at societal status, none of that. It's everything that the United States is for. And so my opponents have to show you that they're meeting a certain threshold that we should undermine the ethical principles of the U.S. legal system. Now, let's also go to the pragmatic solutions, or pragmatic examples that we're giving you in today's debate. My opponents simply have possibly 4% of births due to Hispanic mothers crossing the border specifically to have children. And they also have possibly 0.2% of births related to birth tourism. Whereas what we're showing you is, one, we're creating a subclass in the United States. People will be subject to the law without benefits. Once again, going against the principles of the U.S. legal system. And two, we are losing the discourse that we show you in our second contention. 90% of which this group represents minority groups. This is effective discourse that helps shape U.S. legislation from being xenophobic and from being nativist. Now, we also looked at the fact that my opponents discussed the fact that the problem with legal immigration is illegal immigration. But in actuality, the problem with legal immigration is bureaucracy. There is a 12 to 20 year wait in line to get a temporary visa to be a student or to work. And what we're showing you is that there would also be a bureaucracy to decide who's a citizen, which is a lot larger of a task than deciding who can come in by the hundreds of thousands. So what we're actually showing you is, once again, 1% error rate leaves 650,000 Americans without work and without benefits of being a citizen. And there's no watchdog. My opponents are not able to show this. And when they say that no other country is failing without this system, what they don't tell you is that no other country completely abolishes birthright citizenship. They merely supplement it with other systems, such as just sanguinis or just nexi. And that is why you're voting pro or con in today's round.
How much pressure do you have left? Alright, let's begin. In response to our first subpoint, their first response is that very few births are due to birth tourism. Number one, the issue actual number. The issue is the fact that we're undermining our rule of law by essentially selling our citizenship to rich foreigners, which cuts in front of those who wait to immigrate legally. And secondly, the Center for Immigration Study tells you that the majority of birth tourism goes unreported, and the number could be in the hundreds of thousands. So don't buy into this response, because we're showing you numerics, and we're telling you the harm isn't numerical. So no matter what, don't vote out that. But secondly, they tell you we'd have more women and we should look at trends, but this isn't actually responsive, as trends in the overall would not reflect the same arguments we're talking about. Then they talk about how a woman would have been here for 2 years or more, showing that there's no incentive. One, they can come here 2.5 years early and still have the intention of having a child later. And secondly, Western Kentucky Law Review tells you that 65% of these people cite citizenship of their child as a major incentive to come to the United States. We talk to the immigrants, they don't. Thus, we specifically show you the reason that they're coming here. And then in response, they tell you that the child is being used as a means to an end. But remember, we're providing them residency, so there's no real means harm. So there's no end. In other words, they're not really showing significant harm to the child, which blinds their first intention. Then in response to women's rights, they tell you that we don't actually provide merits, but according to the Hartree evidence we cite, 9% of all women in ICE prisons are pregnant. So in other words, we're specifically showing that ICE is taking in these people and indefinitely detaining them specifically because they are immigrants. Not only that, but they also respond by saying that it's good to deport these people. Now I actually think that this is a horrible response because we're turning this. They're not just deporting these people who are illegal, they're also taking legal immigrants who came through here through asylum and through the waiting process, and then holding them indefinitely so their children aren't citizens. So in other words, it's not good for the rule of law to take legal immigrants and throw them in jail just because their child's going to be a citizen. This is specifically harming their arguments. We're turning that response. Then in response to our second contention, they tell you that the harm is legal quotas, and the reason it's so gummed up is because people trying to immigrate legally. But remember the evidence in our case, according to Shoup, that tells you we can't let in more legal immigrants because of illegal immigrants taking up so many spaces. And not everybody can be a U.S. citizen. So at the point at which 226,000 and 383 illegal immigrants are coming here for birthright citizenship every single year, that comes up 383,000 spots that could be legal immigrants. We're specifically impacting that argument. Thus, we're winning the round.
What again was your warrant for the fact that we arrest legal pregnant citizens of the United States so that it deport them so that their child, which would be a citizen anyway by just saying when this isn't a U.S. citizen?
At the very top of the Hartree evidence we cite, it cites a narrative of this woman who immigrated legally from China, who then was taken into a van by ICE agents and sent to a prison, and basically kept there until she gave birth.
Okay,
at this point, her child is not just one person.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to see that and see the part where she was a citizen and see the part where she had violated our rule of law. And then second of all, I would like to see you to expand this to just more than one example.
This is once again an argument of incentives. What you're fundamentally going to need to remember is that ICE agents are always going to be incentivized to be deporting pregnant women insofar as the system of
ICE agents are incentivized to uphold our rule of law.
But it's not happening right now.
Are you showing us that they are physically deporting more women than men? Like that pregnant women
yes,
on the buses, on the planes.
You guys want numerics? We
So 9% of pregnant women in our ICE prisons leaves the other 91%.
No, that's compared to 4% nationally.
9% are pregnant women.
That's compared to 4% nationally. That's over double the rate in prison. But I have a question for you. In response to our third contention, you read this thing at ICC that says borders are the problem. Can you explain this?
Basically, in terms of terrorism, what you should always prioritize is not some terror super baby that is born here to exploit other countries, but you actually do, the problem and what our government pragmatically prioritizes is our border security.
So
out and out says a provo decreases our security and what's a terror.
Let's talk about border security.
Okay.
The argument that we specifically make, the term that I place on this from the Michigan Law Review, explains that we actually increase hostility and are forced to basically end up wasting resources on our border because we're constantly trying to deport people that are crossing our borders.
First of all, I told you in my case that a pro vote worsens illegal immigration internally, and that makes ICE job even harder. So how do you get any solvency on the... Wait, what?
Why?
Because first of all, you've never responded to the fact that we only deport 3.6 of our current population, so there's
none of this is responsive to the actual arguments we make, which is that empirically people are going to be less incentivized to illegally immigrate to the United States.
So you're just cross-applying birth tourism.
That's not birth tourism.
Economic opportunity. Currently, they have the lowest amount of people.
I told you in rebuttal that if your warrant was true, we would have the same amount of. First of all, we'd have more women than men, and second, we would have the same amount of immigration illegally from Canada and from Mexico. And in the status quo, it's just not true.
Can we answer that? We're showing you specifically that border tourism is going on, but as my partner brought up, The issue is more that private companies in the status quo are able to sell citizenship rather than the U.S. federal government regulating it. It's your job that's not the argument. That is not the argument. But that's not the argument. It's your job as con to justify private corporations selling citizenship rather than the U.S. federal government.
And I'm just going to look at a few main impacts and see whether or not the pro team has actually given you reason first to change a concept that's in our Constitution right now, and second, reasonable belief that the change they're proposing will solve the problems they identify. So that leads me into my first point, which is what the pro team must give you and doesn't is solvency. And so they try this in two ways. And first, they tell you that we're decreasing the incentive to use birth tourism, but what they're not telling you is they've simply gone through this entire debate without responding to our logical limitations. And basically, if what my opponents were telling you was true, we would have more women immigrants than men, we would have women coming, having a child, and leaving immediately, which also doesn't happen, and we would have an equal number of immigration from Mexico and Canada. And none of those three things are true. It's simply put, the incentive is not to have children, the incentive is economics. And because economics exist in both worlds and we have a 3.6% deportation rate, they in no way solve illegal immigration. So keep that in mind when they come up and talk about any impacts which stem from abolishing illegal immigration. So what you're actually going to prioritize is the creation of a subclass. And what we tell you is you have the same number of immigrants in both worlds, but in the pro world, they're detached from society, they make less, have no upward mobility, they can't vote, and that distinctly alters the outcome of elections in key states. So until they can justify that in terms of the weighing against the rest of their case, they don't get any impacts on illegal immigration. So you're flowing illegal immigration to the con. And then let's talk about rights. They say basically we need to prioritize our citizens, and that's not punishing the children. But if they want to access any of their illegal immigration benefit, like decreasing illegal immigration benefits, then they are basically conceding our contention one, because the end game is that we're taking away rights from a child through no fault of his own, and that fundamentally alters the way our legal system operates, and they've given you no justification for doing that. And then with women's rights, again, you're just going to be preferring the rule of law, and it's indefinitely better in the con world. And so then with implementation, basically, if bureaucracy is the problem, the pro world makes it worse. They're asking you to trust a 70% flux in our system that's now discretionary and can shut out minorities. If bureaucracy is the problem, you're preferring the con.
Move on to the last bit. Start off on the issue of values. They never answer back to Mendoza's analysis we read, which tells you that birthright citizenship was not the intent of the 14th Amendment. At that point, you're not going to be looking at that argument. But second, on this point, and this is really important, extend the Smith analysis we read, which tells you that birthright citizenship subverts respect for our rule of law by creating an incentive for people to violate it. At that point, they're never going to be leaning into their constitutionality arguments, because we show you that they are basically undermining the institution by which it operates. With that in mind, you're going to be looking first at the issue of values. Now, they talk about basically punishing the kids, and while it's great rhetoric, you're going to look to the Northern Kentucky Law Review term that we read, which tells you that it's more unfair to legal immigrants' children because the conditions that they're living in is worse. That means that insofar as they never directly answer back the shook evidence in our case, where we tell you that admission is a zero-sum game, we're going to be winning off of this argument because we're showing you that we're better benefiting the children who are in a more dire situation around the world. Then go on to their argument about the subclass. First, extend our Sejon analysis. Remember that abolishing birthright citizenship means a decreased tendency to stay. And here we get to the issue of what's actually going to happen. They draw the two pieces of evidence that we review, which indicates that abolishing birthright citizenship will reduce illegal immigration. Number one, the Harvard evidence, which says that abolishing will have a minimum reduction of 10%. And second, the Northern Kentucky Law Review, which explains that birthright citizenship was a key factor for 65% of illegal immigrants. That means that we are going to be showing a reduction in today's round. But moreover, look specifically at the argument we review from the Michigan Law Review, which tells you that hostility against immigrants is going to be worse in their world because of proactive border fortification. This is also going to answer back the only term they place on terrorism, which means that you can be extending the implication to Georgetown, which is that children are used as a loophole right now to weaken national security. On the issue of women's rights, extend the Michigan Law Review analysis that birthright citizenship essentially forces nations like the United States to crack down against pregnant women as a result of incentives. On the issue of basically birth tourism, remember the IPI evidence my partner read about underreporting, and remember that we're creating a perverse incentive to violate U.S. laws. We are violating U.S. law. They show no substantial harm, and we show you that we can benefit people around the world. For all these reasons, I strongly urge pro-value. Thank you.